In episode 1, we built the strategy. In episode 2, we turned that into an operating plan. In episode 3, we translated that into OKRs. And now we get to the part where most companies break. Because even with all that we've done so far, execution still doesn't happen cleanly. Why? Because OKRs, objectives and key results, or goals tell you what matters, but they don't tell you what actually needs to happen every day to make it real. That's what this episode is about. We're going to take OKRs, objectives and key results, and turn them into initiatives, not tasks, not random projects, initiatives, the actual system of work that drives execution. And I'm going to build it live so you can copy it. But let's talk about why OKRs are not enough. The problem. Most teams think once they have OKRs or goals identified, they're done. But then a few weeks go by and nothing really changes. People are still asking, where are we at on this? What's the status of that? Are we on track in Project X? And someone is still stitching everything together manually. Because OKRs define the outcomes, what we're trying to accomplish, but they don't define how work moves. They don't define what gets built, what gets executed, how teams coordinate, how progress actually becomes visible. So what happens? Execution defaults back to Slack messages, random tasks, meetings on meetings, tons of documentation, and then again, someone holding it all together, which means you don't build a system. You simply just created a scorecard. So let's talk about what initiatives actually are to start with the same definition. So let's define this cleanly. An initiative is the structured body of work required to achieve a goal or an OKR. Again, not task, not ideas, not a list, a system of execution. An initiative answers questions like this. What are we building? What work needs to happen? Who's involved? How does this move forward every week? And how do we know if it's working? So if OKRs define success, the outcomes, initiatives define how success is actually created and performed daily and weekly. This is the layer where strategy becomes real. But here's the gap. Most teams go from strategy, OKRs, task, and they skip the most important layer, which is execution structure. That's what we're talking about today. So instead of having a clear initiative, what a lot of teams have are 50 disconnected tasks. Sometimes the team knows these tasks. Sometimes they're in silos. They have 10 different conversations going on at once, sometimes talking about the same thing, sometimes talking about things that go in different directions. A lot of these initiatives, quote unquote, have scattered ownership or no ownership at all. And then they also have unclear progress because they didn't structure the way to measure it. And someone has to constantly ask questions over and over again, like, what's actually happening here? Have you ever had that from your manager? This is where the system breaks a lot of times, because without clear and clearly defined initiatives, work doesn't live anywhere as a whole. It exists in these little pieces, and someone always has to piece it together again and again and again, week over week. I've been that person. That's why I built Grapevine Workplace. But let's talk about the initiative build framework, because that's going to help us clearly identify what an initiative is, and we can operate on the same playing field as everybody because we've identified it first. So here's the framework we're going to use. For every goal or OKR, you create initiatives that do these 4 things: directly map to the result, define the body of work required, create a shared execution space, and make progress visible without having to ask. If you remember the other videos, one of our key goals is to cut down or reduce the manual coordination it takes to keep work together. And so we're going to do this step by step. I'm going to share my screen. It is a little bit different compared to the other templates that I shared just because I'm having some issues on getting this template ready. But by the time this goes out, you'll be able to access it on your own. All right, so let's go ahead and share the screen and build this step by step. Okay, so I'm sharing my screen. You can see that, yes, the template looks a little bit weird, but this is what you'll have whenever we're able to fully get it uploaded into the website, just like the other ones. But what we want to do now is take a real example and go through this together so you get a better understanding of how you can take an OKR and turn it into a full-on initiative that tells you, your team members, and your leaders exactly what to focus on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, ultimately leading up to the accomplishment of that OKR or the goal. So if we look at part one, we want to define the OKR. So we did that last episode. And so I went ahead and typed this out. So clearly prove that Grapevine Workplace can be the platform to reduce manual coordination for B2B agencies. So since the last time we've recorded, I've already narrowed down who we're going to be focusing on based off of a lot of the conversations that I've been having with agencies. And so what measurable key result are we trying to achieve here? It's going to be acquire 5 design partners that fit our ICP this quarter. And now that might seem simple, but there's 2 things here that really drive this home. And I know we're talking about OKRs. We'll get to the initiative in part 2 right here. But 2 things. One is 5, the number of 5. It gives us a clear, measurable number that we're shooting for and that we can say that we did achieve this or what percentage we achieved it. And then the other is the distinction of they have to fit our ICP, our ideal customer profile. Meaning, in our case, they're going to be a B2B agency or a consulting firm that provide B2B services. And they're typically going to be the operator who manages multiple projects, team and client communication, and then deliverables of the client's work, right? And so that's what is important here. You want to get clear on the OKRs because remember, that's the outcome. That's what we're trying to achieve. And so if or why is this strategically important right now? Well, it's because I actually put it down here. So if this initiative is true, we would be able to connect with other lookalike agencies that match our 5 design partners and close them to becoming Grapevine Workplace users, right? So this is strategically important because it's actually telling us, is our idea and concept of a platform to solve this problem valid? If it's not, then nothing else matters, right? So that's why this is strategically important. Okay, now we're going to go into the initiative. So we're going to define what our specific initiative is coming directly from this OKR that we have, right? So the actual execution system is going to be called Design Partner Acquisition System because it's going to help us say, okay, this initiative, for us to achieve our goal, we have to create a design partner acquisition system that allows us to go into the second part right here. So succeeding in this initiative means we have validated the problem Grapevine Workplace is working to solve, which is providing a better solution for how B2B agency operators manage multiple projects, team communications, and client engagement. I would even say within our system, right? So that is what we're trying to accomplish with this initiative. And again, if this was true, if this initiative succeeds, then we're going to be able to connect our 5 design partners to go out and get more. And now that can be through referrals, that can be through lookalike campaigns, that can be through, the point is that whenever we have this defined, now we understand what we have to focus on and we break that down into the initiative scope or the execution scope. So some of the things that we want to ask is what work lives inside this initiative? List the major execution areas. So some of the things that we're going to be listing out here for hours, again, this would be, you would tailor it to what you're trying to accomplish in your organization and your initiative. But this one, for our specific initiative that we're talking about, we would be executing on targeting. So who we're going to go after, messaging, what we're saying, outreach, how we're going to outreach to them, the sales process. So once we do message them and outreach with them and they convert into a qualified lead or a qualified opportunity, how do we convert them? How do we take them from lead to actually close one? And then how do we improve that, right? So all these right here are going to lead into the feedback loop so we can continuously improve on our methods to do this. And if we execute this, then we can build a repeatable process for bringing in new customers that fit within our ICP. And then once we get to another level of that, then we can go adjacent and maybe target B2B companies, right? Because we already have the ends through the agency. So these are the types of things that you want to think about. What teams or functions are involved? Marketing and sales. We could probably put in a couple of others here, but that's kind of the grand scheme of things. I mean, we could even put like operations, right? Because there's probably going to be sales op, marketing op, rev ops. What tools is this initiative going to live in? So obviously it's going to live in Grapevine Workplace. It's going to live in Apollo LinkedIn. Those are typically the ones that are going to happen right here. Now, this part is super important because if you don't clearly identify an owner, and I'm not talking about a group, it has to be one owner who owns this initiative. If you don't define that, then no one owns anything, and this initiative eventually falls flat and you don't achieve what you're trying to achieve, right? So who is directly accountable for this? Again, one person, not a group. Now you can have supporting contributors who supports this execution, who's going to help make sure that this initiative is seen through completion and success, right? So we're going to put RevOps, marketing, sales. And then who are the executive stakeholders? Maybe they're not there on a day-to-day basis inside and in the trenches with us, but they're going to be the ones who need to know what's going on. And I would even put board members here if you have a board. So the CEO, the CRO, actually I need to add that too. The CRO, the CMO, and the board members, right? And so now we have all the things that we need for the initiative to be fully defined and understand what it is that we're trying to accomplish with this initiative, right? So now we go into the weekly execution structure. And so when we define this, we're talking about things like, what does progress look like every week? And this is critical because if work doesn't move weekly, it's not going to move at all, or it's going to get delayed. And so you want to make sure that you have this weekly execution structure, because another thing that I like to say a lot of times whenever I'm working with clients or just being a leader in a company is what we focus on is what other people focus on. What we reward or we recognize or we constantly bring up it's telling the employees, the people who are responsible for this initiative, that this matters, right? So you want to make sure that you're bringing this up weekly. You want to make sure that you're measuring the outcomes weekly. And to do that, you want to break it down into week one. Now, I only have 4 weeks here in this example, but you can go all the way to 12 or 13 for that quarter, right? It's up to you. Now, if this is an initiative that stretches longer than just a quarter, then you can define, do you want to measure this bi-weekly? So every 2 weeks or every month. But I would be cautious of not doing this weekly because, again, what you focus on gets focus and attention. So we're just going to look at week one here, and you can kind of assume what happens in week 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's just going to compound from those efforts, right? And so here we have week one's focus is define the ICP and messaging, right? So if we didn't already go there, and I would say that we could even go further, like B2B agency operators. Well, what type of B2B agencies? What type of operators? Are they chief of staffs? Are they COOs? Are they managers? Are they directors? Are they program managers? Are they project managers, right? We can go deeper into this. So whenever we define the deliverables, we're talking about personas here. So we list out a couple of names here. We list out the size of the company. We talk about what type of client work they're doing. Are they heavily in Slack or project management? So you get the point here. But basically with the deliverables, you think about it as a project or a product delivery that you're calculating in like a project requirement document or a product requirement document. And you're mapping out, okay, if our focus is define the ICP and messaging, what type of things do we have to deliver or execute on to identify these, right? And then as a part of that, are there any risks that come into here? Like if we don't identify narrow enough of our ICP, our ideal customer profile, then that means the messaging is going to lose clarity. So you can think about the risk aspect of it as kind of enforcing the team and yourself to focus on the reason why this is important. And if we don't do this, this is the consequence, right? Consequence, risk, kind of simultaneous, interchangeable. But that's the thing that we want to talk about here, like message sounding like generic project software, positioning drifts towards all-in-one. These are things that we've already identified that we don't want to do. We don't want to talk about our system being an all-in-one system. We don't want to talk about it just being a project management system. What we actually want to talk about is it being a workplace intelligence system disguised as a work management system, or a work intelligence platform disguised as a work management system, right? So we have that understanding, but we got to call this out so everybody can be on the same page at all times. And once you make this initiative complete, you want to make sure that you share it with all the people who are going to be involved. And I would even say share it with the people in the company so they know that you're working on this or the team is working on this. And if anything comes up, like a conversation with a customer that a salesperson has, or HR is talking about XYZ, or finance is doing their budget on this, you want to make sure that they have enough awareness of what's going on in the organization that if something perks up their ears related to an initiative that you're focused on, they can go and contact you, right? That's where a big gap happens. And a lot of things fall through the cracks, or redundancy or rework, or just assuming things happening and then they don't. Right. So make sure that there's a mechanism. Maybe it's not the whole initiative, but it's like the big picture of just this part right here, where it's like we're creating a design partner acquisition system, and this is what we're trying to solve. And if we succeed, this is what happens. Right. So it might just be this part 2, that you share with everybody. And then the people who are actually working on this initiative, you share with them the whole entire thing. Right. All right. Back to it. So the dependencies here: customer interview insights, existing call transcripts and operator conversations, competitive positioning. These are the things that we're going to need to be able to execute on the deliverables, or provide the deliverables, or create the deliverables, right? So these are the things that we have to think about whenever we're talking about initiative. So if we go back up here to kind of wrap this up in a sense, define the OKR, which we've already done at this point if you followed the strategy series so far, right? Then we go in and define the initiative, not just define the initiative, but it has to come from the OKR or the goal itself, right? And then from there, we define the execution scope. So what falls into this initiative? And another thing that we probably should call out here, like we've done in every other episode prior to this one, is what are we not going to include in this initiative, right? So I would add probably another section here where it says, what do we not focus on? Then we want to have clear ownership, not a group, one person who is responsible for this initiative, right? This is where leadership comes into play. So like if you're an executive, or you're a VP, or you're a director, you're in that position to take responsibility of this initiative or these set of initiatives, right? So step up and be that person that says, I'm going to take on this initiative and I'll be the owner here. And then you kind of make sure that you're following the weekly execution structure. And in some cases, it's not always about, are we constantly progressing in this initiative? In some cases, it's about the lessons learned from that initiative. In some cases, it's about, especially since you're doing this weekly, hopefully, you can see in almost real time what is happening. And if you use Grapevine, you definitely can see it in real time, but it's what's happening so you can course correct. Instead of having a lagging indicator, you now have leading indicators that allows you to course correct if ever an initiative is going off the tracks, right? Okay, like I said, we're only going to go through week 1, but you can kind of see week 2 goes into launch, outreach, run conversations, iterate, and refine. So now this is not just an initiative, it's a loop that becomes super important for how we take this initiative and make it something that becomes repeatable, and not just repeatable, but we constantly improve, right? And that's where part 6 comes in right here. So visibility and tracking. Now, this is just an example of current status. What you want to have is a specific place that this initiative lives. If you use Grapevine Workplace, we recommend using dedicated workspaces. So you create an initiative and then you bring in all the elements and information that's important to that initiative into that one dedicated workspace. That way you don't have to go to all these different places. And then you can leverage AI. It helps with the updates. It helps with reporting. It helps with seeing the different things that are at risk, so on and so forth. And so the point here is that you want to make sure that you're running a good initiative and not a bad initiative. And so if we look at this, we got to track what signals indicate movement, right? What metrics are reviewed weekly, and then what currently threatens success. So this is almost like a SWOT analysis, right? Strength, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. But the signals that indicate movement are going to be super important because these are the things that you're doing every single week and that you're going to be reviewing, right? So for our initiative, qualified lead intake and current customer referrals will mean that we're doing something right whenever it comes to our ICP, because we identified it clearly where they're turning into qualified leads. And then not only qualified leads, our customers that were qualified leads that have turned into paying customers are now sending us referrals, right? That means that we're actually doing more than just qualifying the lead and closing customers. We're providing a product so good that the people who use it also refer it to their network, right? That's the networking effect that a lot of people talk about whenever it comes to a really good product. And then the metrics that we're reviewing weekly for us specifically, it's going to be outreach volume, because the number of people that we outreach to increases the chances of our pipeline growing. And then the pipeline growing increases the chances of closed won ARR. Now, the nuances in here is I would probably look at sales process velocity or sales velocity. I would look at qualified leads ratio. How many leads are we getting in? How many are actually turning into opportunities? And then the closed won, it would be a win-loss analysis. How many are we bringing in that go into the opportunity? And what is the ratio of won to loss? And then from that, the ones that we did lose, why did we lose? Was it from a customer? Was it on pricing? Was it we didn't have this integration? There's a lot of things that we can find in these metrics that we're reviewing weekly. And again, we want to try to get to leading indicators more than lagging indicators. There's always going to be lagging indicators that you can review later. But the goal here, at least for us, is you want to be able to catch it in well enough time that you can do something about it before that customer goes away or that lead ghosts you, right? And so just a couple of things. I only had one here, but like, what currently threatens success? And right now it's oversaturated markets and incumbents. And what that means is things like ClickUp, Notion, Asana. There are companies out there who are just inundated in this ecosystem of tools that it's going to be hardwired to get out of, right? And so we have to think about that. But in some cases, this threat just means that we don't focus on them right now. We find people who are open to switching over to Grapevine Workplace, or we continue to improve on our integrations where that shift no longer becomes a rip and replace, but an add-on that eventually they can move away from tool by tool, right? So if they're using Notion and then they're using Slack and then they're using Asana, then we start off with, okay, let's go ahead and strip away Asana because you're just using that for projects. We have everything that you need in here and maybe more. And then Notion, okay, you're using that for knowledge management, you're using that for SOPs, you're using that for documentation, boom, boom, boom. Let's go ahead and bring you over into Grapevine because you don't need that. And then Slack is like, okay, well, you're communicating with this and blah, blah, blah. Now we have Figgy Chat. You can go ahead and move from there, right? So it depends on how you want to, but take your threats and be honest about them because chances are it's true. And if you don't recognize them, then you're just lying to yourself and it's only going to hurt you and the team in the long run. I've experienced that. All right. So now we move to this last part or a couple of last part, but coordination and communication. So weekly syncs, this is basically just continuing the structure, but weekly syncs, workspace updates. So this is going to be Grapevine Workplace for us. We're going to have a dedicated workspace, and that's going to talk about the progress made, any of the blockers, the next steps, weekly leadership reviews. And honestly, in our system, in workspaces, we have things that do automatic AI updates that get sent out to you internally as the team and externally as the client. We have reporting that is AI driven with the content and the context in the workspace. And again, you can share that to your client easily. We have portals that you can leverage to communicate and coordinate with the client without having to be always on. It can be asynchronous and everybody stays up to date. And they can actually see, the client can see, and you as the leader can see where this specific project or client work stands without even having to ask someone else. You can either go to Figgy, which is our AI bot, and you can ask it, where does this workplace or this workspace or client stand? Or you can go into the workspace itself and ask the same question with AI jobs, and it will give you that. Okay, enough plug of Grapevine. Execution should have a durable place to live. We've already talked about that. So just if you're not using Grapevine Workplace, find one place that you can put everything that you're doing for this initiative inside of it and make sure that the team knows exactly where it is. And if there's anything that's outside of it, like emails or whatever, make sure that they understand that and that they're on there as well. Last thing, describe how visibility is maintained. So again, all of this for us lives directly inside of Grapevine Workplace. I highly recommend it. Obviously, I'm biased, But this is what we've been seeing with our customers and prospects that are thinking about using Grapevine Workplace is that especially our dedicated workspaces and portals, because those are kind of the same thing. It allows the internal team to operate and function and deliver the work in one place. And then it allows the client to be able to operate and manage their work and see where things stand automatically in real time, just by going there. And then they can interact with you there as well. So that's how we're going to be doing it. And then now the last part here is you want to ask certain questions like, can someone see progress without asking? This is specific to us, but I think it's a good best practice that you think about these two whenever you're talking about your initiative. So you don't have to constantly add meetings to the calendar or stand up meetings just to waste people's time, because these things can happen asynchronously. And if you can do things asynchronously and then follow up with a conversation that deep dives in the asynchronous updates, that is actually moving work forward and making meetings more valuable than having a meeting about where do we stand on this, right? So that's one of my big pet peeves. Okay, coordination. Does execution still depend on one person manually stitching things together? If you're using Grapevine, no, it doesn't, right? Because everything lives in there and we track the movements of work. So any meeting that you have, any chat that you have, any update on the project board, any note that was created, it's all living in the activity tab within Grapevine Workspaces. And in the updates on the portal, everything is connected and everybody can go in there at any given time and see what's been done, what's moved, or get an update through AI itself. All right. Okay, does execution, okay, so we just did that. Do teams understand priorities and current status? They should if they're using Grapevine, right? I don't know, this is not about Grapevine, I promise, but everything that we're talking about here, Grapevine Workplace just makes it so much easier to do, where if you are the glue holder that's going through all these motions, imagine just having one place to go and being able to either update everybody without even having a meeting or just letting people understand where things stand in real time. And we have this new command center that I'll be talking about later, but it's literally a real-time command center, like somebody going to NASA and needing to know what's going on in real time. That's what we've created too. So stay tuned for that one in a different episode. All right. Did meaningful progress happen this week? You should be able to measure this where you started at the beginning of the week and where you ended at the end of the week. That should be pretty simple. In Grapevine, you can use Figgy AI. You can use the AI jobs to give an update on where we stood at the beginning of the week and the end of the week, so on and so forth. And then what feels fragile or unclear in Grapevine's workspaces, we have charts. And so those charts take in all the project tasks, anything that is there as far as like a milestone with a due date and things like that. And it will automatically call out risk and tell you that these things are at risk and that they need to be focused on. Or you can use the AI jobs, and the AI jobs, you can go in there and customize a prompt and just say, hey, where should I focus my attention because things are at risk? And then it will spit out a nice report that you can send to your team or you can send to the clients, and then let them know that this is something that you're going to be working on this week with the team to catch up and get these solved, right? Okay. Now, these will be in the template itself, but we're basically just calling out the mistakes that happen whenever it comes to creating an initiative. So let me go ahead and stop on the template sharing and get back to just the talking head, because here I think we're fine. We can talk about the common mistakes that we see and just wrap up there. Okay, so to close this episode out, what I want to just reiterate on is, what do good initiatives actually look like versus bad initiatives? And then we're going to talk a little bit about how this changes execution, and then we'll finish it off with the common mistakes that I was showing you before I stopped sharing the screen. So a good initiative is tied directly to an OKR or a goal for your organization. It has clear ownership, again, one person. It has a defined scope, so everybody knows exactly what fits into this initiative, and that kind of ultimately tells you what doesn't. But I would even call out some of the things that don't fit into that scope. It's going to move weekly. That's why we're measuring it weekly. That's why this part is so important, because OKRs are quarterly. Yes, you're going to check them weekly. You're going to check them monthly. But this is actually checking and measuring if the team is doing what they need to do to help us execute and accomplish our OKRs or our goals. And then lastly, for a good initiative, it's visible without asking, right? So anybody in the organization can go to this one place and see where that initiative stands at any given time without having to rely on someone else, right? Now, the important thing to call out here is, obviously this isn't going to happen or be capable of happening if the team isn't updating the system. if the system isn't updating itself, right? So you want to make sure that you have good hygiene and processes in place for that. All right, a bad initiative is basically everything opposite of that. It's vague. It just is a list of tasks, has unclear ownership or multiple people owning the initiative. It requires constant coordination, meetings, chats, so on and so forth, different tools, which is the last one, lives across 10 different tools, 10 plus tools. And so if your initiative still requires someone to explain it over and over and over and over again, or answer questions over and over and over again, you didn't create a system, right? So that's the ultimate kind of leveling here, is ask yourself those questions. Does it still require me to explain it? Does it still require me to piece it together? Does it still require me to send out a status update? Right? If those answers aren't correct, then you don't have the system. And if it's not a system, it's not repeatable. That's the whole goal here, right? We want to be able to make strategy executionable, and we want to make it repeatable so we can improve over time. All right. How does this change execution when we go from, instead of strategy, OKRs, and then whatever the last one was, we go from strategy to the operating plan to OKRs to initiatives? So what that actually does is, before, work is scattered. So only certain people know where certain things are. And that's where the manual coordination comes in. Updates are manual, speaking of that. So people have to go about piecing that work together so they can actually send an update. By the time they send the update, it's already outdated, right? So before, updates are manual, and then alignment depends on people, not the system. So that's before. And what we've just talked about is the after. After you do this and have initiatives fully mapped out, like what we just discussed, then work lives in one place. That initiative has one place to live. Progress is visible and coordination is reduced, or in some cases, the system does the coordinating for you. That's the shift. And the big shift here is you go from managing those tasks to actually running systems that allow you to constantly move forward instead of always looking in the rearview mirror and then having to course correct retroactively, right? Now, to end this video and this initiatives episode, let's talk about some of the common mistakes that happen whenever teams are planning initiatives and trying to run them. So they treat initiatives like a task list. And I've been there, right? I've had initiatives. I thought I was spending too much time on it. Like, let me just get a pen and a pad and write it down, or let me have a Apple Note or whatever and just list it out. That's not good enough, right? Nobody knows what those tasks are. There's no clear owner. So that's a big mistake, right? The second one is not defining the scope deeply enough. If you looked at the template again that I created, the deliverables have a long list. The risk have a long list. What was the other one? The dependencies have a long list, right? The goal is to take guessing out of the game, right? Now, it doesn't mean that everybody's robotic and we're doing this on a daily basis. We're basically setting the boundaries and the guardrails to allow your team and employees to operate within them, which ultimately gives them the autonomy that they deserve and are pushing for, while you as the operator have set this environment that they can play free in, where they're not going to veer off into this direction or this direction. They're always going to stay within these boundaries. And if they don't, you'll know, because you're doing things weekly. You're measuring the outcomes in the initiative. You're measuring the outputs of the OKRs. You're comparing that to the operating plan and the strategy, right? All these things are building a foundation for your company to operate within. And that only makes it a better experience for your employees. And when people know what they need to do, it's a better experience for the customers that they're working with too. All right. The biggest mistake is no clear owner or multiple owners, right? It gets a little muddy whenever there's multiple owners, but it's definitely messy whenever there's no clear ownership at all. Number 4, no weekly structure, right? This is the set and forget that I constantly talk about. If you don't have a weekly structure, this goes back to the operating plan too. If you don't have a weekly structure, it's just a free for all. And you're hoping that people are just going to do what they said that they were going to do. And now I'm all about giving people the benefit of the doubt, trusting them, and so on and so forth. But again, what you focus on gets focused on. And so if you're not going to measure this weekly, then it tells people, okay, that's not that important, right? And one of the things that we haven't talked about yet is, if you have this rock star person on your team and you let them get away with doing certain rogue activities or things that don't fit within here, you're telling the other people that they're different and they treat people differently. And so maybe this isn't as important as it is. I can go rogue and just be really good at what I do, right? That's not how it works. Okay. Then the last part is the no visibility layer. And this is where a lot of companies operate in. They take this time to build their strategy, to create OKRs, to talk about these things and make sure that they're at the forefront. But there's no clear way to see the work happening in real time, or at least that week, right? And so that's the goal here. If it's not visible, it's hard to create leading indicators, meaning that you're always working backwards. So make it visible. And then the biggest one, and the whole thing for this video, is just skipping initiatives entirely, right? We talked about where this is where a lot of companies fall short because they go from OKRs to free for all, right? You want to take the OKRs and turn those into initiatives that tell the people what they need to focus on daily and weekly, and make sure that it's attached to the goal, because then that is how you ultimately reach your goal. Whenever you reach your goal, your OKR, then you're doing that through your operating plan, ultimately feeding up to the strategy. So by the end of the year, you would be able to say, okay, in Q1, we started off here. It was okay. We were kind of getting our feet wet. Q2, we got a little bit better. And then Q3, we iterated here and focused on some of these things because of the findings that we had in the last half. And then now by Q4, we're rolling on all cylinders and we're closing deals. We're winning customers. We're turning these things into repeatable processes, right? Okay, enough ranting from me. Hopefully you found this episode helpful. I'll get that template out, but let me know. What is your thought on initiatives? Do you think that we're overkill here? Do you think that this is something that should be mandatory, required, or do you think OKRs are enough? And then on the flip side, let us know what else you would like to see on this channel. We'll start to factor in some of the product itself and take in some of these templates that we talked about and show you exactly how that can operate in Grapevine Workplace. But once again, thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next episode.